Representative Hunter, thank you for coming. We're very happy to have you. We arranged this quite a while ago, and you were still very early. I think we're setting records for protocol here. It's excellent. So I want to start, just tell us a little bit about how you got started in electoral politics.
Well, I'm kind of a different breed because I grew up in Oklahoma, and my dad was in Republican politics. My dad was a Republican Party county chairman in Oklahoma. And my mother was a Democrat. That was an interesting family situation. And I got involved in politics, followed more on my dad's side, got involved in the Republican politics in Oklahoma. I went to high school in Oklahoma, and then I went to University of Kansas and got into student government politics. I was the vice president of the student body at University of Kansas. Then I went to SMU. And while I was at SMU, I worked for a former state Republican senator named Ike Harris and worked for him for a while. And then in 1978, I moved to Corpus Christi, Texas. And I chose Corpus Christi as I was in law school. And I got to Corpus Christi and enjoyed it. I wanted to live by the water. I'm a big fan of the coast. And I had never run really for any sort of public office. In 1987, I was approached to run for state representative. And long story short, I ran as a Democrat. And in the late 80s, Texas was primarily a Democrat state. And I served 8 years, and then I took a break from politics. I left 11 years. And then I came back and ran in 2008 as a Republican. And then I was elected, and I serve today in my 12 years of service. So that's kind of the long distance. My children were 1 and 2 when I ran. And I will tell you, when you run for office, especially on a state, it's tough when you have little kids. My daughter, who's in your audience, was born while I was in session. And so I have 3 kids who I could hold in my political pictures. Today they can hold me in the political pictures. But that's kind of the role in politics, and it's always been in the State House. And I've, as I said, run twice. And it's kind of an interesting perspective because I've been in both parties and has seen pretty much history where there's not a whole bunch of us left.
Right, your hiatus kind of straddled a pretty big shift. You came back to something very different than what you left. Talk a little bit about that. Was it just unbelievably different when you came back? I mean, you came back after the sea change of the early 2000s. Did you have to retool much? Was it?
Not really. I mean, what a lot of people don't realize as a state representative, and I tell everybody that's here, make sure that if you run for office, you know how much they pay. They pay you $600 a month minus taxes, and that's all you get, and you shouldn't pay us a penny more. And they tell you that it is a part-time job because we basically serve in the legislature. I live in Corpus Christi, so I move basically to Austin every 2 years for 140 days. And you basically leave your family and you live in Austin, and then you go back on the weekends. And I will tell you that from the political standpoint, it's an interesting perspective because you have to work it. Not only do you have to work for a living, you have to take care of your constituents, and you have to be in Austin. So the comparison with the 11 years, I had more hair the first time, was better looking the first time. I will tell you that the rules, the procedures really hadn't changed that much. I probably got a little bit of an advantage coming back. And another thing for all of you that are listening, as a representative, seniority travels with you. So even though I'm not going to tell you that seniority sometimes matters and everything, it does in certain things. So my 8 years traveled with me, and so I get to accumulate that for 4 years. All that means is I get a good office and a parking spot is basically what you get. But and it helps you in certain committee picks. But pretty much, you know, the people are great. You've had kind of a little bit different shift when I was in there the first time. I don't know if some of the audience is from West Texas. The West Texas population, South Texas population, where I am, have had different population shifts since the late 80s and the early 90s. And so people-wise, it was great. Procedure-wise, I didn't see much change. I think that probably the one thing that helped me, and I'll tell you all this, the best thing that probably helped me, the comparison between the two, is being out 11 years. And why is that good? Because I'm just like every one of you. You get to live under the laws that are passed, and you get a different perspective. And people talk to you and give you ideas. Like we have students here. And during that 11 years, I talked to a lot of students because my kids were in school. And so it gave me a good education. So when I came back in, I'd say I had a more broadened view of how we should operate government.
A little less in the bubble, maybe.
Probably.
So now, you know, so today you're chair of the Calendars Committee. We joked about this a little bit before you came. Tell us about the Calendars Committee. I mean, what does the Calendars Committee do?
Well, most of you probably think the Calendars Committee is an exciting role. It's not Sports Illustrated calendar. It is not a governmental calendar. What it is it's a unique situation in the state of Texas. And it's probably maybe only unique to Texas. And here's what it is. It is the gatekeeper for legislation. It's a 15-member committee that I chair. And the bottom line is we have to review all laws and legislation, and we set the calendar for House members to vote. So we have to look at it, we meet as a committee, and a lot of times people need to study and research and look at things, but we set the voting for the members of the House. Now there's another calendars committee, it's called local and consent, but we're the general calendars. So we're called the gatekeeper.
So how hard is that job?
It's a difficult job. It's very difficult. We tease, we're there 5 months. And let's pretend everybody here in the audience is a member of the legislature. You love me and my committee for 4 months because you want me to set all your bills. And then for the last month, I'm not liked a whole bunch because a lot of your bills don't get set. Sometimes it's due to just number. A lot of times legislation and laws aren't introduced till the end of our sessions. But it's a difficult, but you know, it's an important process. It's a very, very interesting people process. And it's a hard role because you have to work with people. We open the process up so students that are here, folks that are here could have input into the system. But it's a difficult role, but you know it's good. And I will tell you that I'm probably not on everybody's A card, you know, just because you have to make some hard decisions. But I will tell you I had a good committee, and I think that they did a real good job. I had some very good staff who did a very, very good job. So it's hard, but I think very constructive.
How hard are the politics to manage on that committee?
It's very, very difficult. You know, here you have, again, you all are the legislature. And here you're all looking at me saying, when are you going to set my bill? And it may never got set. And I'll have both parties represented on the committee. So you have to manage politics on the committee, and you have to manage politics on the House floor, which we call it, the 150 members. But you know, overall, it's, I think that if you always put the people first, you can always manage the politics.
Do you think it was harder than it might have been otherwise? I mean, I think I know the answer to this in some ways, but do you think it was harder than it might have been otherwise given the budgetary problems this last time, or the pressing budgetary issues?
Really,
is it
really
always
not.
hard?
It's always hard. What happens is it doesn't matter what the issue is because we have to set the calendar. We have to set your agenda. And so whether it's budget, whether it's human services, whether it's health, whether it's higher education. It's always basically all the issues are important. So each session shapes the agenda of the laws filed, and it's just a difficult process. And but no, I don't think the budget had as much. I'm not going to say that you don't get a little, positioning, which people do, but generally on budget issues, everybody's pretty practical about making sure everybody gets to vote, because government operates on a budget, and you've got to make sure that you handle it right.
You were also a member of the Redistricting Committee. To go to something less controversial. The federal courts in Washington, apparently following the advice of the Justice Department last week, have declined to clear the maps that the legislature has passed at this point. Now, they haven't rejected them out of hand, but there's going to be more to come. What's your sense of where that process is? Do you have any updates for us? I mean, you have a sense of where that's going to go?
I don't. I'm a lawyer, so I'll give you kind of a lawyer-legislator. Redistricting, for those of you that don't know what it is every 10 years we take the census. Texas is now the second largest state in the United States. I predict in 10 years of the next census we'll be number one. We'll be the most populated state. You get your census numbers, and then we have to set the districts and the population for state representatives, state senators, state board of education, and the U.S. Congress. And what happens in that process from the legislative branch is you have to do it based on population. Now, some areas of the state over the last 10 years have not grown. Some areas have really blossomed in population. Unfortunately, population controls. You may love your area, but if you've lost a lot of folks, those public official numbers go towards where the population is. What the legislature does, and I may be one of the few who have been through more than one redistricting. I was also in redistricting in the early 90s, and then there was a modification, and then I watched it from outside in the early 2000s. Redistricting is public policy from the legislature, and then it becomes law in the judicial branch. So what you have is a public policy decision to be reviewed by the judges, federal court. And the judges may change, they may not change, but it shows you the intertwining of government, which you learn in your classes, legislative branch, versus the judicial branch. So, no updates for you. You rely on the courts and you respect the decisions, and we just go forward. But I expect that we may visit some of this in a couple of years again when we show up. And many times in redistricting there are changes, and then the legislature has to readdress in a couple of years.
So that leads to a question I was going to ask later. So you do think you guys will maybe have another whack at it?
Well, I think if I look at the pattern over the last 20 to 30 years, I think federal, the congressional, sometimes you have a population shift or a population change, and we had 4 added to Texas this year, 4 new congressional seats. So a lot of times those congressional seats get modified by the court and then addressed by the legislature just because of the law of nature. And nothing unique this time. I've seen it when I was there the first time. I think in the Dallas area they had some modifications. So at least on the federal side, is it for sure we're going to do something? The answer is too early to tell. Has the pattern been that we've gone back in and looked at things? The answer is yes.
Since you've raised the next legislature, what do you think is already on the horizon when you all get back together in January 2013? I mean, clearly there were some things that were deferred. What do you see kind of looming out there?
I think water is a big issue. Sometimes we don't see the importance of water. Look at what we've had this year. We've had a drought, which led to horrible brush fires. We haven't had as much rain. We now have an issue of who owns what water rights. I live on the coastline. I have to deal with salt water and fresh water. I also have issues that deal with ebb and flow, salinity of water. So I think water is going to be a big issue, and I think water is something that we do need to address. It's basically a fundamental issue for anybody that lives in the state of Texas. So I think that will. Budget is always an issue. Your budget, what a lot of people don't realize is Texas has an interesting situation. When we meet as a legislature, we allocate the money that we've received over the last 2 years. It's the 2 years revenue that we then give for the future. And you're given a 2-year budget, and like a lot of times the higher education, they're placed in a situation where they have to budget over 2 years because we don't come back for 2 years. And so budget will be an issue. It always is. And really it should be, because we should always be overseeing the money input and the money spent in the state of Texas. So I think those two issues will be there. I think that we'll have to kind of watch. No doubt we have a presidential campaign coming up. That's going to impact issues that we will look at. You'll have statewide issues that come up. That'll be shaped. What we do right now is on the House side is the Speaker of the House assigns the committees their charges. So for the next 11 months, our committees will be reviewing issues to come up with the new laws in January 2013. But I think right now, water I think is an issue. I also think that the budget is an issue. And I'm hoping that we can focus on higher education.
I want to move on to that. One more beat on that. You were here in the spring. Speaker Straus was asked, I think from the audience, whether you would be addressing the margins tax in the session. He said no, but he thought it would be probably something that would have to be looked at during the interim. In the last month or so, he's followed through on that. You expect that would be part of what they'll try to engage in the budget?
You know, it's hard to tell on margins tax or revenues where they're going to look at. You've got 11 months of discussion right now to kind of see the path on where folks, I'm not only talking about legislative folks, I'm talking about the general public who may want to look at other things. So I guess it's, we'll have to follow to see how it develops. The way I always look at these sessions when they're a budget is everything will probably be reviewed. Some may get more attention than others, but I think you just got to expect that everything's on the table. Any of you out here take economic courses? See, they didn't want to raise their hands, I say. Well, that's kind of like the budget process. And what we have to do is we have to make sure people are engaged because it's very important. Economics is very important. And sometimes it gets a little dry, so we have to really focus because it's so important to the operation of government and the people.
I thought you were going to say it's like taking economics, it's pulling teeth. Well, you mentioned higher ed. You hosted a higher ed summit last week in the district that was really well attended. Kind of tell us, why you were interested in doing that and how it worked out. What came out of that?
Here's what I think of. I mean, higher education. What is higher education? It's education, it's research, it's development, it's economics. I mean, we have the best universities and colleges in the United States in the state of Texas. And let's brag about them. In the mid-90s, we held a summit. And the summit was basically to focus and to emphasize the importance of colleges and universities. And by gosh, it's great to showcase our state, but why not showcase our own students, our faculty, our administrators, our families, our parents? Let's show what Texas is. Higher education is a reflection of us. And so in the mid-90s, when I was younger, we'll put it that way, it was very successful. And I'll never forget one of the issues that we dealt with was healthcare. And they looked at where higher education was coming from healthcare and how technology was developing through research and development at our colleges and universities. And a lot of things have happened since then. So I have a bias towards higher education. I think a lot of us that are from South Texas, we're ingrained in being very strong higher education supporters. And colleges and universities in South Texas are communities. You're part of the community. And I felt like, well, why not showcase Texas colleges and universities again? Let's brag about ourselves. Let's look at this. I mean, I don't know if any people in here have had families, or you personally, or friends who've been afflicted by cancer and heart disease. Where do you think most of the research and development comes from? Colleges, universities. They've been a big help in that arena. So not only do you educate, you research, develop, and you bring good things not only to Texas, but to the entire United States. Also, we need a good sounding board. You know, let's hear what are your needs. Why shouldn't we hear what students want to say about tuition? Why don't we hear from the local communities throughout the state on maybe new master's and PhD programs? For example, I always get a kick out of Texas. I live in the hurricane zone. I still don't understand why we let Colorado people tell us how many hurricanes we're going to have each year. Maybe we should start forecasting ski resorts for Colorado. My point is we've got some great opportunities, and all I wanted to do in the Higher Ed Summit, we had over 400 and something people. And I think we got the word out that higher education is important. It's an economic game changer for this state. It is a bragging rights for Texas. It's a bragging rights for our students and our parents, our faculty, our staff, and all the folks involved. And so if we get something positive out of it, we have gone up the ladder. And if we can come up with some good laws from it, we've done the right thing.
How broad-based in the state do you think that view is? I mean, there's been a fairly heated conversation about higher education in the last, and I wanted to ask you about that. But before even asking about the particulars of that, I mean, I think I asked Chairman Branch a similar question. Is there a broad enough kind of support for the role of higher education to be that can be transformed into something that will politically support the kind of changes you're talking about, a legislative agenda that would really move forward on higher education?
I think so. I am. Let's take some ideas here. Texas has some areas of master's and PhD programs. I mean, the more we provide, the more programs we bring to Texas, the more jobs we bring to Texas. But I do think that we as legislators have a responsibility to educate the public. See, public officials got to remember that they may run for office, but they also have a responsibility to let people know what's going on. And I'll tell you, sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But higher education, to me, we need to be explaining what higher education is. Sometimes people think, oh, all it is a tuition issue. Well, no, that's not right. It's a people issue. I mean, in my hometown, I've had 2 universities, now over 10,000 people. That's big for our area, but it's growing. And we should be showcasing the programs. We should be showing people what you do. We should brag on the students. This is the future that takes over from all of us. And it also promotes our state. And so, does everybody have my viewpoint? I'm sure they don't. Do I hope that everybody does? I sure hope I do. I hope we can get in there. I have, in my family, I'm all over the spectrum. We've had one of my children is in public university, one has been in private university, one is in a professional school, one is in a master's, and so I've been all over from the private and the public. And I just think that the more we educate and are positive, you get positive. The more you talk positive, the more public officials talk positive, we're going to get positive. If all we do is talk negative, we're only going to get negative or not do anything.
You think the recently created Oversight Committee is going to help steer that discussion?
I sure hope so. I mean, you got to give credit. We got an Oversight Committee, and let's get behind them and support them. And what we need to do is senior members like myself, the old members, I guess we call them, we need to get behind them and push positive programs. That doesn't mean that you're not critical on issues, but I think the goal is to pass laws that work.
I want to move out of policy just a little bit in the last few minutes, and you and I have talked about this. You're one of the members that uses Twitter, sure. Or at least is associated with using Twitter. Twitter and Foursquare, to be fair. I don't want to leave anybody out. It seems that you're usually doing this to let people kind of know where you are. I mean, the vast majority of the way you use Twitter is, I'm kind of here doing this now, although I did find you triumphantly ousting somebody as the mayor of a Starbucks at one point. I mean, talk a little about how you made the decision to use social networking as an elected official, what you think it gets you.
Well, I do not carry, these are not guns, these are two different phones. So not only do I believe in social media, I have BlackBerry and the Sprint 4G. So I use both sort of systems to basically learn how to communicate. We are in a technological society today. People don't have as many home landlines that they used to have. Most people just have cell phones right now. And let me tell you, I know that you all are probably tweeting here. I tweet, I Facebook, I Foursquare. And we do LinkedIn. And I have some great staff who have developed and made this part of effectively communicating. I also want to reach people that I haven't been able to reach. I also not only use the mobile connection, we also are placing ads now in social media online throughout some of the newspapers. In fact, the Higher Education Summit, we did the same thing. So I'm a big advocate of it. I think that's where we're going. I also think that, we need to get more folks plugged in. I'm probably a better emailer than I am a texter, I will tell you that, because I can be more wordy in my emails. The Foursquare, he is right. If you follow me, you will see exactly where I am. And I use the Foursquare so that people can follow me and come find me. And we set meetings up based on that so folks can come. It's kind of like a mini town hall meeting. Now, the problem is if you do it, you'll know exactly what I order at the coffee shops and everything like that. But it's a great concept. It's the new wave. We need to get more folks communicating on this sort of way of communication today.
And are people showing, do people
Yes,
show
they do.
up?
Yes, they do. They do. We hold a lot of meetings. I'm trying not to give a private plug to certain establishments out there, but he is right. I'm a big Starbucks drinker. And we meet at these places and we Foursquare, and a lot of people show up just to come talk. And to me, that's, hey, then it's working. I've been able to communicate, and I got a new group to talk to. And I hope you all will do the same. If you go online to electtoddhunter.com, I use my campaign. It's called electtoddhunter.com. Just sign up for the email news, and you will follow what we do. And we do a newsletter telling you where we are, or you'll get plugged in if you're in Foursquare. And we'll try to friend you.
Now, another facet of technology, you also sponsored HB 2977 last session, which would have restricted electronic communications by elected officials during public meetings. That's pretty interesting. Could you talk about what you were thinking in doing that?
Here's, it was very interesting. I told you I was born in Oklahoma. I was kind of raised in Oklahoma. I've lived in Texas almost all my life. Oklahoma wrote about my texting bill and supported it. So it was an interesting issue. They just recently wrote about it. Here's my view. Most all of us probably in this room, probably ahead of a lot of folks in technology and communication. Now, let's pretend that we are in a committee hearing. If I'm in the committee hearing and you're the public coming to talk to me, if I pull this phone out in the committee meeting in front of a microphone, is that a public record? I'm in a public setting. 2, is it courteous to you? I mean, you've come all this way to talk to me about legislation. So I introduced legislation to spark the discussion that I think that if you text or you BlackBerry in a public meeting, you can get up and walk out the door and do it in the hallway. But if you do it in the formal committee hearing, then that could be a public record. And so that was what my issue was, is to say don't do it, show courtesy, just leave the room, but it could be a public record, an open record request. Now, I will tell you that the House and Senate floor has different laws. It doesn't apply to the floors of the House and the Senate, but it's mainly in committee hearings. And you would have thought I had thrown the first rock when I did this. But it was interesting because I think they did some analysis. I may have been one of the first in the country that has raised this issue, and I predict to you that I think you'll see other states addressing this issue. And I think it's important. And I'd like to hear your feedback. If you go to my email, let me know what you think.
Do you think it's broader, too, in terms of who can communicate with legislators while they're legislating?
For example, I mean, you got to remember I say I'm the old guy because I've been there twice. And I know how things operate, because the more you're there, you just learn. It's just like if you're in a class, every day that you're there, you're going to understand more. I don't think somebody should be communicating necessarily on that in a public meeting from the room. That's the whole point. You're going to the microphone to talk to me. If you're doing side conversations, 1, it's taking me away from talking to you all. But 2, then it raises a question. What's that communication about to a public official? So my view is that it cuts down on that. If I vote, you should see how I vote.
So you got a committee hearing, but that's about as far as it went this time, right?
It's about as far as it went, but we'll be back.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Okay, one last question. I've got to ask you a little bit of a question about politics.
Sure.
As you said, you're a senior leader in the House, and I don't mean you're an old guy. You've worked closely with Speaker Straus, and Speaker Straus has been subject to some pretty vehement opposition since he's been Speaker, and very much from inside, more narrowly the Republican Party and more broadly among some conservative factions. See any signs of this subsiding? Are people going to accept the Speaker? I mean, it doesn't look like it from the outside. I'm wondering what the state of play is from your perspective.
You know, I don't know what the state of play is. Joe Straus is a personal friend. He is a good friend, and I think he's a good guy. You got to go back to basic politics. If you know somebody, you've been with somebody, and they have been a good friend, you stick with your friends. And Joe Straus, the Speaker, has been that way. And I think he's done a good job. Has he gotten criticism? The answer is yes. Do I know who's doing it? Not necessarily. But everybody's entitled to their own opinion. When you run for office, you're going to not necessarily have everybody for you. And I think he's handled it extremely well. There's no doubt that there has been differences of opinion. I support him. He's my friend. I think he's done a good job, and I think he's done good for Texas.
That's pretty unambiguous. With that, we're going to open it up for question and answer. Now, Mike Heidenreich has a microphone back here, so if you have a question, please raise your hand, but wait for Mike to come to you because we need to get your question on tape. the Helen Thomas of the speaker series, Paul Theobald.
Thank you, Chairman, for coming today. We're in a break between sessions, so I'd like to take the opportunity to go national. Our governor is running for president. What personal interaction have you had with him through the legislature? Would you say that his so-called flubs have been indicative of his character? Is he smarter than that, et cetera, et cetera? What's your take on that?
I may be one of the few people that can give you a historical answer. I have seen, known, and been with Rick Perry since 1989. Many of you may not have been born. Rick Perry is a friend of mine. Rick Perry has a good heart. When you get involved in national politics, it is a different situation. It doesn't bother me that anybody's flubbed or not flubbed if they tried. He is a Texan, and I'm always going to go for Texas. I kind of judge him in the same way as I do Speaker Straus. If you're my friend, I'm going to hang with you. And if you make mistakes, you just hang with your friends. He and I have known each other. I lost my hair, he kept his hair. Can you see a better presidential pick from the hair salonist lobby in the United States of America from him? I think he's a good guy. I think he's been a good friend of mine. And you know, he's having to go through scrutiny. Just, you know, it's a tough deal, that national politics. And it doesn't bother me that people, you know, flub or think, heck, all of us do. I think you just stick with your friends. I'm going to stick with him. He's my friend, and he's a Texan. And I will tell you, Ron Paul is a Texan too, and I've known him since the mid-90s. So you got two Texans in there. Remember this. In the end, we still have Texas involved, and I think that's very, very important. So I think Rick is a good guy, doesn't bother me at all, and I support him as a friend and a candidate.
I want to follow up on that just a little bit, and then we'll come over here. You mentioned earlier about the way that the legislature is organized, the low pay levels, et cetera, being, you know, the way it ought to be. The governor, his latest kind of campaign program rollout, part of this was adopting some of the Texas model for his national political program, in particular, more of a part-time legislature, cutting the pay of members of Congress. You think that translates to the national level?
You know, it's hard to tell because, you know, regions of the U.S. are much different than the regions of Texas. And for example, let's talk about cutting congressional pay. I'm sure they don't like that. But, you know, for somebody who makes $600 a month minus taxes, it's an interesting topic. Let's talk about the U.S. Congress. He is raising an issue for discussion. Now let's look at everybody here. We tweet, we social network, we Facebook. Should Congress start looking at maybe voting or conducting meetings through webcasting? That sure would reduce costs for all the taxpayers in this room. So what you're hearing is you're hearing these sort of issues being raised. It's a game changer of government nationally. So is it good or bad? I don't know. Does it cause a new social network web discussion? Yes, and that makes it good.
But in terms of the governor's presidential campaign, he's trying to tap into a kind of dissatisfaction with Washington with this, right?
Sure, and I think there is. I mean, you know, Washington it's a large place, and some of the interests don't necessarily line up with the state of Texas. We're a pretty independent group, and we're proud of it, and it's good to be proud of it. But he wants to plug in on that. That's a theme. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, he tried. And I will give him credit. I mean, Rick Perry has tried to develop the social media in campaign, and he's done a pretty good job of it. Now, how effective that becomes, we'll just have to judge as we get into these primary elections. The one thing I can tell you about Rick Perry, don't ever count him out, because he's a very, very good campaigner.
Come down over here, Mike.
Hi, Thomas Just, thank you for coming out today, appreciate it. You had said earlier that initially you ran as a Democrat and then switched to Republican, and you seem to value your friends a lot. Speaking of that change, can you explain sort of, did your own views change, or do you think the party shifted, or is it a combination of both, and can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. The question, as you heard, has to do, in the late 80s, 90s, I was in the Democrat Party, and today I'm in the Republican Party. The answer is, I think a little of both. I think the party's changed a little bit. I think my viewpoints changed a little bit. What really happened was Texas was a one-party state in the late 80s and the early 90s. And it basically was a business, conservative Democrat group, and then metropolitan Democrat group. It was kind of an interesting formulation back then. There weren't a whole bunch of the Republicans. When George Bush got elected, even though Bill Clements had been elected previously, you started seeing a change in Texas trending conservative business, conservative economics, and the Republican Party kind of expanded. You had some Democrats, if you check history in the mid-90s, when George Bush ran for president, came out for him in the state of Texas. I do not say anything negative on Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, whatever party. I'm dedicated to the party that I run with, but I always remember you run with the people first. And when you're a state representative or state senator or whatever position, Congress, you represent everybody. You got to keep them first. But I enjoyed my time in both. Don't have any criticism, but I think it was probably a combination of the trend of the state, probably some of the party platform principles, and just me and personally go in that direction.
Hi, Ryan Wallace. Thanks for coming out today, Chairman. You spoke just now about always running with the people. Bringing that up, there's been a lot of talk, or a lot of response from Texas voters, especially 2006, 8, and 10. Over 90% of the people in Texas have said that they would like to see spending limits imposed, with, tied to some measure like population plus inflation. And I'm just wondering, really why we haven't seen any action on that, even though we've seen these numbers since 2006 continuously, and they have increased. So if you could just speak to that a little bit, please.
I can't answer much before 2009 because I was still out of office during that time. Let's talk 11 first. 11, the big problem is most of the time ran out because of redistricting and the budget. And kind of let me explain this as an answer to your question. The legislature meets 140 days every 2 years, and unless there's a special session. But what happens is, it's really about approximately 90 to 100 and something days where most of the activity happens. On both sides of it, rules kick in where you're not necessarily able to deal with issues, spending limits or whatever. So take that 140 days and kind of what I always say is kind of use a general number of 100. So you have 100 days to get these things passed. And a lot of times it's easier to slow or not pass than pass. It's harder to pass a bill. It's very hard to pass. It's sometimes easy, if you know the rules, to slow things down and get objections. I can't tell you, other than 11, I think time ran out, because I think there was discussion, time ran out, redistricting, we had emergency items, we had the budget, and it basically absorbed a lot. In '09, I can't recall why they weren't addressed. I can tell you that the spending issue has certainly been discussed, and it may be on the list of things to look at next year during the interim. The key thing, if you're interested in budgetary or interim or spending, is to make sure we bring these issues up with the committees in the interim, because they set the agenda. If we don't, not you, but if we don't, it makes it harder to bring up new ideas. But I don't have a good answer, because a lot of the committees I sat on, I was not individually involved in that, but that's kind of my explanation for why we may not have reached it. But I do believe you're going to get a healthy discussion on it.
I think with that, I'm going to thank Representative Hunter for coming.
Sure.
And you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was very good.